I stood in my pajamas at 6 in the morning, staring at the bright red and gold wrapping paper covering every inch of Sheriff Karen's patrol car. The enormous bow on top fluttered in the breeze as her colleagues gathered around, some laughing, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Karen's face was purple with rage as she screamed at me from across the street. "You think this is funny? I will have you arrested for vandalism." But I had documentation for everything, and she was about to learn that bullies eventually meet their match. 6 months earlier, my life was exactly what I had worked 20 years to achieve. I owned a modest two-bedroom house on Maple Street, complete with a narrow driveway that I had saved for 3 years to get properly paved. Every morning, I would sit on my front porch with coffee and toast, watching the sunrise paint the oak trees gold while my neighbors walked their dogs and headed off to work. The neighborhood was the kind of place where people still waved at each other. Mrs. Henderson next door brought me tomatoes from her garden every summer. The Johnsons across the street always helped me move my trash cans back from the curb on windy days. It was peaceful. It was home. Then Sheriff Karen moved in. She arrived on a Tuesday in late March, driving a moving truck followed by her black and white patrol car. I watched from my kitchen window as she directed the movers with sharp, clipped commands. She was a tall woman in her 40s with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that seemed to scan everything like she was looking for violations. Being the kind of neighbor my parents raised me to be, I baked a batch of chocolate chip cookies and walked them over that evening. Karen answered the door in her uniform, even though she was clearly off duty. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said, holding out the plate. "I am Sarah from across the street. If you need anything while you are settling in, just let me know." She took the cookies without smiling. "Sheriff Karen Mitchell, I trust this is a quiet area. I work nights sometimes and I do not appreciate noise." The way she said it felt more like a warning than a conversation, but I smiled anyway. "Oh, it is very quiet here. You will love it." She nodded once and closed the door without saying thank you. I walked back to my house feeling unsettled, though I could not put my finger on why. Maybe she was just tired from moving. Maybe she was having a bad day. Everyone deserves the benefit of the doubt, I told myself. She would probably warm up once she got comfortable. Looking back now, I realized that was the moment I should have trusted my instincts. The way she held herself, the way she looked at me like I was already guilty of something, the way she used her title instead of just saying her name, like she needed me to know she had authority over me. But I was still thinking like someone who believed that people in positions of power used that power to help others. I was still naive enough to think that a sheriff would be a good neighbor to have. Someone who would make the streets safer, who would look out for the community. I had no idea that I had just welcomed a predator into my peaceful little world. The first sign of trouble came exactly 1 week after Karen moved in. I woke up Monday morning to find her patrol car parked halfway across my driveway entrance. Not completely blocking it, but positioned just enough that I would have to back out at a sharp angle to avoid scraping her bumper. I knocked on her door, still in my work clothes since I was already running late. "Good morning, Karen. I hate to bother you, but your car is blocking part of my driveway. Could you move it, please?" She opened the door wearing a bathrobe, her hair still messy from sleep. For a moment I thought I saw annoyance flash across her face, but then she smiled. "Oh, sorry about that. I had a late shift last night, and I guess I did not park very carefully." She moved the car, and I thought that was the end of it. People make mistakes, no big deal. But the next week it happened again, and the week after that. Each time her car was positioned just a little bit more in my way. Each time I had to ask politely for her to move it, and each time she acted like it was an innocent mistake. By the fourth incident, I was starting to get frustrated. I was arriving to work late because I had to wait for her to wake up and move her car. My boss was starting to notice. "Karen," I said when she answered the door that Thursday morning, "this is becoming a real problem for me. I need to be able to get out of my driveway without having to wake you up." That was when I saw her real face for the first time. Her friendly expression vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. She straightened up to her full height, which was considerable, and looked down at me with the kind of stare that made my stomach clench. "Is that so?" she said, her voice dropping to a tone I had never heard her use before. "Well, let me tell you something, Sarah. I am a sheriff in this county. I work long hours protecting people like you from criminals and drug dealers. If my parking occasionally inconveniences you, maybe you should consider getting a wider driveway." She leaned closer, and I could smell coffee on her breath. "And maybe you should be more grateful that you have a law enforcement officer living on your street, keeping an eye on things. You never know what kind of trouble might find its way into a quiet neighborhood like this." The threat was unmistakable. I felt my face flush with anger and embarrassment, but I also felt something else. Fear. This woman had a gun, a badge, and the authority to make my life very difficult if she wanted to. I understand you work hard," I managed to say. "I just need to be able to get to work on time." She smiled again, but it was not friendly. It was the smile of someone who had just established dominance. "I will see what I can do," she said, and closed the door. But instead of getting better, it got worse, much worse. The next Monday, her patrol car was parked directly across my entire driveway. Not at an angle, not partially blocking it. Completely across it, like she had deliberately positioned it to trap me. When I knocked on her door, she took 15 minutes to answer, and when she finally did, she was fully dressed and clearly had been awake for a while. "Oh, did I block your driveway again?" she said, not even trying to sound apologetic. "How clumsy of me." I realized then that this was not carelessness. This was deliberate. This was a game to her, and I was the toy she had decided to play with. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in late May. My mother had called me at 5 in the morning, crying and barely coherent. "Sarah, your father collapsed. We are at the hospital. The doctors think it might be his heart. Can you come?" I threw on clothes and ran outside to my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with my keys. My parents lived 40 minutes away, and every second felt precious. I had to get to the hospital. I had to be there for my mother. But Karen's patrol car was parked across my driveway like a prison wall. I ran to her door and pounded on it with both fists. "Karen, Karen, please. I have a family emergency. I need you to move your car right now." No answer. I pounded harder, shouting her name. My voice was breaking with panic and desperation. "Please, my father is in the hospital. I need to get there." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door opened. Karen stood there in her uniform, fully dressed, holding a cup of coffee. She had clearly been awake for some time. "What is all this noise about?" she said calmly. "My father is in the hospital," I said, tears streaming down my face. "Please move your car. I am begging you." She took a slow sip of her coffee and looked at me like I was something mildly interesting she had found under a rock. "That sounds serious," she said. "Have you considered calling an ambulance?" "I need to drive myself. Please, Karen, this is an emergency." She shrugged. "Well, I suppose I could move my car, but first I think we need to discuss your attitude problem." I stared at her in disbelief. My attitude problem. You have been very demanding lately, very entitled, banging on my door, making demands, raising your voice. That is not how you speak to a law enforcement officer. By this time, several neighbors had come out to see what the commotion was about. Mrs. Henderson was standing on her porch in her bathrobe. The Johnsons were at their front window. I could see others peeking through curtains. "I am sorry if I seemed rude," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But please, my father might be dying. I need to get to the hospital." Karen nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. Family is important, but respect is also important. I think an apology would be appropriate." I just apologized. "A proper apology, on your knees." The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked around at my neighbors watching us, then back at Karen's cold, satisfied expression. "You want me to get on my knees? I want you to show proper respect to a law enforcement officer. Then I will move my car." The humiliation burned through me like acid. My father was possibly dying, and this woman was using that fact to force me to grovel in front of my entire neighborhood. But what choice did I have? I got on my knees on her concrete steps. "I am sorry for being disrespectful to you," I said, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. Corinne smiled. There was that so hard. She walked leisurely to her car, taking her time getting in and starting the engine. It took her another 2 minutes to slowly back out of my driveway, making sure to adjust her mirrors and check her phone before moving. By the time I got to the hospital, my father was stable. The doctors said he had suffered a mild heart attack and that he would recover. But I had missed the scariest hours of my mother's life because a sadistic woman with a badge had decided to torture me for her own amusement. That night, I sat in my kitchen and cried until I had no tears left. Not just for my father or for the humiliation, but for the realization that I was completely powerless against someone who was supposed to protect and serve. But as I sat there in the darkness, something else began to grow alongside the pain. Something cold and focused and determined. If Karen wanted to play games with people's lives, then she was about to learn that games could be played by more than one person. The day after my father's heart attack, I made a decision that would change everything. I was not going to be Karen's victim anymore. I was going to fight back, but I was going to do it smart. I took a week off work, telling my boss I needed time to be with my family. That was partly true, but it was also cover for what I was really doing. I was going to war, and wars require intelligence. I started with the basics. I researched Karen's schedule, nodding when she left for work and when she came home. I discovered she worked 4 10-hour shifts per week, usually starting at 6 in the evening and ending at 4 in the morning. On her days off, she rarely left the house before noon. I bought a small notebook and began documenting every interaction we had, every time she blocked my driveway, every witness who saw her behavior. I started taking photos with my phone, making sure to capture the position of her car relative to my property line. Then I got smarter about it. I called my cousin Jake, who worked as a paralegal in the city. "Jake, I need to understand something about property rights and harassment. If someone keeps blocking my driveway, what are my legal options?" He was immediately interested. Jake had always been the family troubleshooter, the one who helped relatives navigate bureaucracy and legal problems. "Blocking someone's driveway can be both a civil and criminal matter," he explained. "If it is intentional and repeated, it could constitute harassment. If it prevents you from accessing your property, it might be considered unlawful detention. And if a police officer is doing it, that opens up potential civil rights violations." What about recording conversations? This state allows single-party consent recording. That means if you are part of the conversation, you can record it without telling the other person. I felt a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. What would you do if you were in my situation? Jake was quiet for a moment. I would document everything, build an ironclad case, and then I would find a way to make her hang herself with her own rope. That night I called my friend Marcus, who owned a small business in town. Marcus was creative, resourceful, and had connections throughout the community. I need your help with something unusual, I told him, and I need you to keep it completely confidential. What are you thinking? I explained my situation, and Marcus listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. You know, Sarah, I have been wondering when someone was going to stand up to her. She pulled me over last month for supposedly speeding in a 25 zone. I was going 22, and I had it on my GPS. But when I tried to show her, she threatened to arrest me for arguing with an officer. So you will help me. What do you need? I told him my plan. It was risky, creative, and completely legal. More importantly, it would turn Karen's own behavior against her in the most public way possible. Marcus started laughing. You know what? She has had this coming for a long time, count me in. Over the next few days, I refined the plan with obsessive attention to detail. I researched precedents, studied local ordinances, and identified every potential legal pitfall. I practiced with recording equipment until I could operate it smoothly. I mapped out timing, coordinated with witnesses, and prepared backup plans for every contingency. Most importantly, I prepared myself mentally for what was coming. Karen had used her badge to humiliate me in front of my neighbors. She had tortured me during a family emergency. She had made me feel powerless and afraid in my own home. Soon, she was going to discover that the quiet woman she had been tormenting was much more dangerous than she had realized. And unlike her, I was going to accomplish my revenge without breaking a single law. The opportunity came on a Friday in early June. I had been monitoring Karen's patterns for weeks, and I knew she had a habit of parking especially aggressively before her weekend shifts. Something about starting her 3-day weekend by asserting dominance over the neighborhood. I spent that Thursday evening making final preparations. Marcus had delivered the supplies earlier in the week, and I had them hidden in my garage. Mrs. Henderson had agreed to be a witness, along with the Johnsons and 2 other neighbors who had grown tired of Karen's behavior. Everyone had their phones ready. The plan was simple but required perfect timing. I would create a situation where Karen would be unable to resist making her worst impulses public, and then I would respond in a way that was both legal and unforgettable. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly, perfect weather for what I had in mind. At exactly 7:30, I backed my car out of my garage and parked it in the street directly in front of my house. Then I went inside and waited. Sure enough, at 8:15, Karen's patrol car pulled into the street. She saw my car parked legally in front of my house and my empty driveway, and I could almost see the gears turning in her head. This was her chance to trap me again, to make me late for work and force me to beg her for mercy. She parked her patrol car directly across my driveway entrance, but this time she did something different. Instead of going inside, she walked over to my front door and knocked. I answered with my phone recording in my pocket and a calm expression on my face. "Good morning, Karen. What can I do for you?" "I noticed you parked in the street instead of your driveway this morning," she said with a smirk. "That seems unusual." "I was rearranging some things in my garage. Is there a problem?" Well, I just want to make sure you understand that this is a residential street, not a parking lot. People cannot just leave their cars wherever they want. I nodded politely. I understand. I am parked legally within the designated area and I will move it shortly. See that you do, she said, turning to walk back to her house. I would hate for you to get a ticket. That was when I played my ace. Karen, before you go, I have a question. How long are you planning to leave your car blocking my driveway? She stopped and turned back to me, her eyes narrowing. What did you say? Your patrol car is parked directly across my driveway entrance. I am just wondering when you might move it. I parked on a public street. I can park wherever I want. Actually, blocking someone's driveway is illegal, even on a public street. I looked it up. Her face started to turn red. Are you trying to tell me the law? I am just asking when you might move your car. I will move my car when I am good and ready to move my car. And if you do not like it, you can call the police. She was getting louder now, and I could see neighbors starting to come outside. Perfect. You are the police, I said calmly. That is right, I am. Which means I know a lot more about the law than some suburban housewife who thinks she can tell me what to do. I am not telling you what to do. I am asking you politely to move your car. And I am telling you to mind your own business before you find yourself in handcuffs. She stormed back to her house, slamming the door behind her. Her patrol car remained exactly where it was, blocking my driveway completely. I waited exactly 1 hour, long enough to establish that she had no intention of moving it voluntarily, long enough for several neighbors to witness her refusal, long enough to make sure she was settled inside her house and not paying attention to what was happening outside. Then I retrieved my supplies from the garage and got to work. I had purchased industrial-strength gift wrap, the kind used for wrapping cars at dealerships, bright red paper with gold ribbons. I had foam padding to protect the paint, clear tape that would not leave residue, and an enormous bow that Marcus had special ordered from a party supply company. Working quickly but carefully, I covered every inch of Karen's patrol car. The hood, the trunk, the doors, the windows, the roof. Everything except the license plate and the emergency lights. I documented each step with photos, making sure to capture the fact that her car was still illegally blocking my driveway. The coup de grace was a giant card taped to the windshield. To Sheriff Karen, thanks for being such a special neighbor. From the Maple Street Homeowners Association. By the time I finished, a small crowd had gathered. Some neighbors were laughing, others were taking pictures, and a few were recording video. Mrs. Henderson was clapping her hands in delight. "Sarah," she whispered, "that is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." I stepped back to admire my work. Karen's patrol car looked like a birthday present for a very spoiled child. But more importantly, it looked like exactly what it was, the vehicle of someone who had finally been held accountable for their behavior. Now all I had to do was wait for Karen to discover my gift. Karen discovered my handiwork at exactly 2:30 in the afternoon. I was sitting on my front porch, pretending to read a book while actually watching her house through my peripheral vision. The neighbors who had witnessed the morning's confrontation were also strategically positioned around the street, some working in their gardens, others sitting on their porches. When Karen's front door opened, the timing could not have been more perfect. Her shift started at 3, which meant she was already cutting it close. She stepped outside in full uniform, keys in hand, clearly planning to make a quick exit. Then she saw her car. The sound she made was not quite a scream and not quite a roar. It was something primal and rage-filled that caused several neighbors to stop what they were doing and stare. She stood frozen on her front steps for a full 10 seconds, her mouth hanging open, as she processed what she was seeing. Her patrol car looked like a giant Christmas present sitting in the middle of the street. The red wrapping paper gleamed in the afternoon sun, and the enormous gold bow fluttered gently in the breeze. The card on the windshield was clearly visible from 50 feet away. "What the hell is this?" she screamed, her voice carrying across the entire neighborhood. She charged toward the car like a bull, but then stopped abruptly when she realized that half the street was watching her. Mrs. Henderson was openly recording with her phone. The Johnsons were standing on their front porch with cameras. Two other neighbors had come out of their houses to see what the commotion was about. Karen's face went through a series of color changes, from red to purple to an almost grayish white. She looked around at all the witnesses, then back at her wrapped car, then at me sitting calmly on my porch. "You," she screamed, pointing at me with a shaking finger. "You did this." I looked up from my book with what I hoped was a surprised expression. "Good afternoon, Karen. Is everything all right? Do not play dumb with me. You vandalized my car." I stood up and walked over to where she was standing. Several neighbors followed, creating a small crowd around the wrapped patrol car. "I did not vandalize anything," I said calmly. "I gift-wrapped it. There is no damage to the vehicle. The paper is held on with removable tape, and I was careful not to scratch the paint." "You cannot wrap someone else's car." "Actually, I can. I checked with a lawyer. As long as I did not damage the vehicle and I used removable materials, gift wrapping something is not vandalism. It is creative expression." Karen's eyes started twitching. "I am going to have you arrested." "For what exactly?" "For," she sputtered, clearly struggling to come up with an actual crime. "For decorating your car while it was illegally parked in front of my driveway," I asked innocently. That was when she completely lost control. "I am a sheriff. I can park wherever I want, and I can arrest anyone who disrespects me." "Actually," said Mrs. Henderson, stepping forward with her phone still recording, "you cannot park wherever you want. My grandson is in law school, and he told me that blocking driveways is illegal for everyone, including police officers, unless it is an emergency." "Mind your own business, old woman." "This is my business," Mrs. Henderson replied calmly. "I live here too, and I am tired of watching you bully my neighbors." Other neighbors started speaking up. Mr. Johnson mentioned the time Karen had threatened to arrest him for letting his dog off-leash in his own backyard. The woman from the corner house talked about how Karen had given her a ticket for having her trash cans out 15 minutes too early. Story after story of petty tyranny and abuse of power. Karen became increasingly agitated as she realized that her carefully cultivated fear-based control over the neighborhood was crumbling in real time. And with multiple phones recording every word, her meltdown was being preserved for posterity. "All of you shut up," she screamed. "I am in charge here. I am the law." That was when Marcus arrived. I had texted him when I saw Karen come outside, and he had brought friends. 3 cars full of people who had their own stories about Karen's behavior pulled up to watch the show. "Hey Karen," Marcus called out cheerfully. "Nice car. Did someone have a birthday?" The laughter from the growing crowd was the final straw. Karen lunged toward me, but then seemed to remember that she was in uniform and being recorded by a dozen phones. Instead, she yanked the card off her windshield and began tearing frantically at the wrapping paper. But the industrial-strength paper was not easy to remove, especially not quickly. and with each piece she tore off, more neighbors gathered to watch. Someone had called the local news station. Another person was live streaming the whole thing on social media. Within an hour, Sheriff Karen's public meltdown over her gift-wrapped patrol car was viral. The videos spread across Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok with hashtags like Sheriff Karen and gift-wrapped justice. By the time she finally got her car unwrapped and drove away, 45 minutes late for her shift, her professional reputation was in ruins, and the investigation into her conduct was just beginning. The viral videos of Karen's meltdown reached the county sheriff's department within hours. By Monday morning, I had received a phone call from Internal Affairs Detective Rodriguez requesting a meeting to discuss my complaints against Sheriff Mitchell. I arrived at the county building with a thick folder containing everything I had documented over the past 3 months. Photos of Karen's car blocking my driveway, audio recordings of our conversations, witness statements from 6 different neighbors, a detailed timeline of escalating harassment culminating in the medical emergency incident. Detective Rodriguez was a professional woman in her 50s who listened to my account without interruption. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and shook her head. "Mrs. Patterson, I want you to know that we have received 7 additional complaints about Sheriff Mitchell just since the weekend. Your video seems to have given other people the courage to come forward." "What kind of complaints?" "Abuse of authority, harassment, inappropriate use of police resources, conduct unbecoming an officer. One woman says Mitchell threatened to arrest her for recording a traffic stop that she witnessed. A man claims she wrote him a citation for an expired registration that was actually still valid for 6 more months." Over the next 2 weeks, the investigation expanded rapidly. The department's internal review found a pattern of misconduct stretching back to Karen's first month on the job. Citizens who had been too intimidated to complain before were now coming forward with their own stories. The most damaging evidence came from Karen's own patrol car. Like all police vehicles, it was equipped with a dashboard camera and GPS tracking. The data showed that she had repeatedly parked in illegal positions, including blocking driveways, fire hydrants, and handicapped spaces. It also revealed that she had been falsifying her location reports, claiming to be on patrol when she was actually parked at her house. The legal resolution came faster than I had expected. Karen was suspended pending investigation within a week of the viral incident. Within a month, she was terminated for violation of department policies and conduct unbecoming a law enforcement officer. But the personal resolution was equally satisfying. I filed a civil lawsuit against Karen for harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. My lawyer, recommended by cousin Jake, was confident we had a strong case. "The medical emergency incident alone is worth significant damages," he explained. "When a law enforcement officer deliberately prevents someone from reaching a family member in the hospital, that crosses several legal lines." Karen's lawyer contacted us within 2 weeks requesting settlement negotiations. They offered a sum that covered my legal fees, compensated me for the emotional distress, and included a formal written apology. More importantly, the settlement required Karen to attend anger management counseling and prohibited her from seeking employment in law enforcement anywhere in the state. The county also implemented new policies as a direct result of my case. Officers were now required to complete additional training on appropriate use of authority and community relations. Citizens were given clearer channels for reporting misconduct, and the department established a civilian oversight board to review complaints against officers. The neighborhood impact was equally significant. The new sheriff's deputies who patrolled our area treated residents with respect and professionalism. They introduced themselves to neighbors, participated in community events, and demonstrated what law enforcement should look like. Karen moved away from Maple Street within 6 weeks of her termination. She never spoke to me again, but she also never retaliated. Perhaps she had learned that some battles are not worth fighting, especially when you are clearly in the wrong. The empty house across the street sold quickly to a young family with 2 small children. When I brought them welcome cookies, they smiled genuinely and invited me in for coffee. It felt like the neighborhood was healing. 6 months after the gift wrapping incident, I was sitting on my front porch on a sunny Saturday morning, watching my new neighbor's children play in their front yard. The little girl was maybe 5 years old, the boy about 7, and they were drawing pictures with sidewalk chalk while their parents worked in the garden. It was exactly the kind of peaceful Saturday morning that had first drawn me to this neighborhood, but now it felt different, richer, more meaningful, because I knew what it had cost to preserve it. The viral fame had faded, as viral fame always does. The news crews had moved on to other stories. The social media posts had been replaced by newer controversies. But the changes that mattered most were the ones that could not be measured in views or shares. Mrs. Henderson stopped by every week now, usually bringing vegetables from her garden and staying for tea. We had become genuine friends through our shared experience of standing up to a bully. The other neighbors were friendlier too, bound together by the knowledge that our community could protect itself when necessary. The new deputies who patrolled our area had restored my faith in law enforcement. Officer Williams, a young man fresh from the academy, had introduced himself to every household on the street. Officer Chen, a veteran with 20 years of experience, had organized a neighborhood watch program that focused on cooperation rather than suspicion. I still thought about Karen sometimes, usually when I was backing out of my driveway without having to navigate around an illegally parked car. I wondered if she had learned anything from the experience, if she had taken the anger management counseling seriously, if she had found a way to channel her need for control into something constructive. Mostly, though, I thought about the lessons I had learned about myself. Before Karen, I had been the kind of person who avoided conflict, who assumed that authority figures were inherently trustworthy, who believed that being polite and accommodating would always be enough to resolve problems. The experience had taught me that sometimes conflict is necessary, that authority without accountability becomes tyranny, that bullies rely on their victims' unwillingness to fight back, and that the most effective way to stop a bully is to make their behavior public and costly. But perhaps most importantly, I had learned that creativity and persistence were more powerful than anger and violence. Karen had expected me to either submit to her abuse or lash out in a way that would give her an excuse to arrest me. She had not expected me to outthink her, to turn her own behavior against her, to transform her moment of power into her moment of downfall. The gift wrapping had been more than just revenge. It had been a statement, a declaration that ordinary people could find extraordinary ways to hold the powerful accountable, that humor and intelligence could triumph over intimidation and authority. My father had recovered completely from his heart attack, and he loved telling the story of how his daughter had gift-wrapped a sheriff's car. My mother had framed a photo of the wrapped patrol car and hung it in her kitchen. My cousins and friends called me a legend, though I always reminded them that I had been careful to stay within the law. These days, when I sat on my porch with my morning coffee, I did not just see a quiet suburban street. I saw a community that had learned to stand up for itself. I saw neighbors who knew they could count on each other. I saw the evidence that ordinary people, working together, could create the kind of world they wanted to live in. And every morning, when I backed my car out of my driveway without obstruction, I was reminded that sometimes the most important victories are the ones that restore simple dignities. The right to leave your own home, the right to be treated with respect, the right to expect that those who serve the public will actually serve the public. Karen had tried to take those rights away from me, but in the end, she had only made me more determined to protect them, not just for myself, but for every person who had ever felt powerless in the face of petty tyranny.